You're listening to Data Center Therapy. Please take a number, and an engineer will be right with you.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Data Center Therapy, a podcast from IVOXY Consulting that talks all things IT with a healthy dose of empathy, and yes, again, still, emphasis on the healthy. I'm your host, Matt. Why are my hands chapped? Yeti. And alongside me is my co-host, Matt Cozzolino.
Have you seen my desktop?
Each episode, we dive into the wide range of technologies that make up this sandbox called IT that we all play in. We share our hopes and dreams, opinions, both positive and critical alike, all with a touch of empathy, because at the end of the day, we all need a seat on that couch. Now, we're following up on our previous episode where we talked about the benefits and the pitfalls of working from home. We've asked our own David Crow to join us. David, he's been on the show once or twice before, I think, most memorably during our HCI Throwdown episode a few months ago, where he admirably took on the role of the resident punching bag.
Welcome back,
No, I'm
David.
just kidding. Just kidding. David excels in the virtual desktop workspace, and we thought it'd be a really timely topic to talk about today, so we wanted to have him on. David, how are you?
I'm doing good. And being a punching bag is definitely I'm going to call it a skill position. So thank you.
A learning skill?
Yep.
Well, yeah. So, David, I mean, you've been one of our busier folks. I mean, thankfully, most of our customers are deemed essential, right? And we certainly are by this shutdown order right now, right? But thankfully, a lot of our customers are as well. And so it's, even though they're deemed essential, it certainly isn't business as usual right now.
Right.
And one of the ways that things are shifting a bit is everybody's mostly working from home. And that's where you come in. And what are you seeing out there? Basically, what people are saying VDI, but is that always just a desktop, or does it encompass different types of remote work? What does remote work look like?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely more than one way to skin that cat. So it can be full desktops, it can be applications, streamed through remote desktop session hosts. It's definitely it's very unique. Is definitely one of the things that I've found with it. And every single business has its own set of requirements and mandates and just sort of the flow of how they want their workers to be able to get the job done, what they're used to. So it's very personalized, but it's definitely something that is a hot topic right now and something that a lot of my customers are reaching out about and want to talk about.
So if I'm a customer and I'm trying to build an environment for all of my employees that have to now work from home, why would I want to do a virtual desktop versus just like a VPN?
Well, generally, I would say bandwidth efficiency is a pretty large taker there, and the performance of the applications that you're running. So with a VPN, which generally works great, it's better for a smaller percentage of your employees. If you have 500 people who are all trying to access this particular application, VDI can recognize some efficiencies by having the virtual machine that they're logged into be in the same data center as the application that it's communicating with, rather than going back and forth between your home PC or laptop.
You're pushing images across the line, and that's it.
Right.
Yeah,
it's only the
something
display.
like that big ERP app that's got to go database query after database query is probably not the best to run over VPN.
Over the WAN.
Right, yeah. And some of these things are very latency sensitive. So with VDI, we can get the latency between the virtual machine and the application down to less than a millisecond, And even I'm working with customers who are, I'm in the Federal Way area. I've got customers who are in Auburn who are 3 miles away from me. I've still got a 13 millisecond round trip because just the inefficiencies of the internet provider.
Where cables are run, right?
Correct, yeah.
Fiber in the ground.
And Matt and I talked last week about basically the whole split tunnel debate, right? To your point, where a lot of VPNs, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would assume that most corporate VPNs are probably tunnel all traffic, right?
I mean, yeah, a lot of times that's what I'll end up doing is I'm not sure what I need from the client, so let me just have all of it, right?
Right, and when you now expand that out to the entire workforce, you're in for a hurting when it comes
Hmm.
to the bandwidth. So to your point again, David, I think at scale, what are we talking about from a typical remote desktop or VDI
Right.
bandwidth? Ask you're probably in the tens or low hundreds of kilobits a second, probably. I would think.
Right. Yeah, it stays as light as it can, and there's all kinds of optimizations that we can put in place that we don't have the ability to control with a VPN. So with VDI, we can do things like throttling, or we can use UDP instead of TCP. There's a lot of granular group policy based ways that we can control exactly what the traffic is going to do, right? Like we have that control, but with a VPN, you turn it on, and then that's kind of
It's just
however
on.
it's configured is the way that it is. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I did have a question. I've seen and I've heard you talk about it a whole bunch, but I never really dug into it. What's the difference between PC over IP and Blast? Because those are like the two big protocols that we're using now, right?
Yeah. So the biggest difference is that VMware owns Blast, which
Okay.
comes with its own set of pros and cons, right? So it's a great protocol. Generally, I see PC over IP used where customers value image integrity and specifically color integrity over necessarily bandwidth.
Okay.
So PC over IP is pretty efficient, but one of the things that it's very good at is showing vivid colors, and being able to
Is
tune
it
it to the point
vividness
where it's
or
lossless.
is it a pleasant image or is it meant to be accurate? Would you
Um,
say?
I would say the PC over IP is very accurate.
Because I'm thinking of it from a medical standpoint, right? And maybe I'm way off, and maybe
Right.
nobody in their right mind would ever
Oh,
go
there's some.
near a virtual remote session for analyzing an MRI scan digitally, right?
Medical
Because they have
imagery
expensive
actually,
monitors.
it's a huge thing for
Oh,
so
okay, thank you.
yeah, we have one of our great customers over Lake Hospital runs View desktops, and they do PC over IP, and they have folks doing medical imaging on it, and
I didn't realize they were doing med imaging over that.
I
and
didn't. I
and
didn't either.
and they thought about going to Blast, and they even tried it out actually last year in a project I was working on with them, and they tried Blast, and kind of their doctors and nurses went, no, this is not gonna fit the bill,
Oh,
which is something that I would never key into personally, but something that I've heard from multiple customers. If they talk about moving from PC over IP to Blast, there are kind of some color bleeding issues and stuff like that. So it's
so
definitely
probably a little more efficient, but you suffer for it.
Is
right, and
is
it's
that
very
because it's like running it through H.264 or whatever, and the high def audio or video compression algorithms to get the video to you? Is that why?
I think Blast is a little bit too tuned for bandwidth efficiency,
Okay.
and it has some things suffer because of it. So for your normal
The
workers,
good enough effect, right?
exactly. For your normal
Hmm.
workers, it's going to be fine. But
Yep.
for very specific industries where, the difference between a pixel being off is,
Is
you're
that
getting a,
cancer? Or is that not?
right. It's a,
Yeah.
Oh, geez, yeah.
a
Well,
little bit of an issue there.
in virtual desktop, we've talked about this in the past. It's one of those topics. I'm so glad we're talking about this. And Kazo, those are great questions. In that, um, it's one of those things that is relatively easy to set up. Like, hey, man, let's install a connection server and let's spin up a desktop. I got my gold image. Boom, you're done, right? Oh no, the 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 proof is in the actual design of the solution in terms of what are the requirements, what is the use case, and let's work towards that. It's not really the technology that's the fancy thing that you're flashing and dangling and saying, look how cool this is. It's what do you want to do? And then there's a
Right.
very specific effort and concerted effort to build to that. Because like you said, Blast or PC over IP, they'll both work. They'll both work well. Great. Which one? Well,
Hmm.
I don't know. I just need a desktop. That's not enough. We need to know what you're doing because I didn't even know that. The medical imaging, it almost seems like very specific use cases have very specific and assigned solutions.
Hmm.
I think VDI more than anything else that I have worked with comes down so much to customer requirements, right? Like what are you doing specifically? What are your employees doing? Matters a ton, and being able to spend the time and identify those requirements is paramount if you're going to be successful.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
In your previous VDI, whether it's a pre-sale cycle where a customer has questions and say, hey, maybe this is, tell me about remote work, VDI. Not even remote work. I kind of spoiled my own question there. But when people ask about VDI and virtual desktops, I would assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they're not thinking about it from a disaster scenario, at least primarily. It's probably, let me get off the rat race, the wheel of refreshing my desktops every 2 or 3 years, and this and that, and patching Windows and having non-standard installs out there. So from a management and security standpoint is usually the requirements for what I understand behind VDI. Are you seeing a lot of people ahead of time who have said, hey, also, how do I use this in a disaster, which we can consider this a disaster because it shifts where the traffic comes from. It's basically a DR event. Are you seeing a lot of people surprised that they're now leaning on this infrastructure that wasn't really built to handle this in this scenario, but yet here we are?
I definitely am. A good number of my customers are running into situations where they didn't expect to put this number of folks on VDI, and now all of a sudden, their their bandwidth is a precious commodity. Going into this, and where they had 50 employees working from home or working remotely with VDI, now all of a sudden it's 500. So it's definitely a huge shift for a lot of my customers. And one of the things that I'm going to throw out there is that VMware is actually they're doing a great job of putting out to customers, hey, we're going to give you a discount on expanding your capacity if you're running Horizon in the cloud, things like that, where they're recognizing that and definitely wanting to help customers out. But it's a big shift, and it's not one that everyone was ready for. And I think that really just bandwidth and core networking infrastructure is crucial, and something where a lot of my customers are realizing, like, okay, it was sufficient for my regular sort of day-to-day business, but it's not sufficient for everybody working from home.
Is that Horizon in the cloud, is that something that's native, like a service from VMware, or is that something you would set up and build on like your VMC on AWS?
Oh boy. There's a lot of options there. So the answer is yes.
Yeah, solve this problem, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So it can be either VMC on AWS based. You can run desktops in Azure that are probably Hyper-V under the covers, right? There's a lot of ways to set it up. One of the things that I like about running it on AWS is because you're doing Horizon Cloud on essentially VMC. What you end up with is something where you can build proper Horizon environments and create cloud pods between your on-prem pod and something on AWS. Where with Azure, as of today, you don't have that option. I know it's something that VMware's looking into, and I'm sure the options will continue to proliferate. But as of today, I find the most contiguous feeling way for users is VMC on AWS.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel like it's tough, and a lot of DR events prove out where you hate to have a disaster, an emergency, whatever, force somebody to look at things from a different way or have to spend money on infrastructure. It's a shame that it took that to have it happen, but a lot of times that's just the realities. A lot of times with the DR site, I'm going to drop this amount of money for a site that I hope I never have to use. Well, what is the cost of of not having it if you need it, this and that. But I feel like also, and I'm not of the opinion necessarily, not to get too political, that we're going to have more of these pandemics in the future. I'm not on board with that train of thought, but you do have to somewhat look ahead and say, well, what if? And I feel like this is now another form of DR, and or we're going to see more working from home, period. Even at the far side of the other side of this entire
Get out through
crisis
the
we're
end of
dealing
this.
with right now. Well, I mean, crisis. Let's say tomorrow it's over, we're clean, no worries, fine,
Well,
whatever.
Well, we had this forcing
We're going to have
function,
work
right?
from home. Work from home is still now going to be
Mm-hmm.
much more
Mm-hmm.
ingrained than it ever has been.
It's been successful for the last couple of weeks, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, and green screens, sales of green screens must have gone through the roof, right? I dug mine out of the old closet when I was a Twitch star for 2 weeks, and by star I mean me and my dog watching me play City Skylines.
I hope that there is a shift. If there's a positive thing to come out of it, I think really making work from home accessible for a lot of folks is that positive. Like I think it's an awesome thing for employers to recognize and do, and I think that you know folks can be really, really productive from home with the right tools, and you're promoting a quality of life for your employees that I think is awesome, and it's unrivaled, right?
Yep.
I mean, the idea of drive an hour and a half into Seattle versus walk downstairs and get to work is
That's a great point. That is a great
I think
point.
there's a big mental shift that has to go with that. I know it did for me when it was actually like we're actually working from home now. There is a thing where I get up and I go to work, and that
right.
happens to be upstairs, but you have to go to work still.
It is tough because you meander back down for some coffee.
You
Dog
get
comes
sidetracked
in,
by the
pokes you in
dog.
your leg.
Yeah.
Throw my ball, Dad. Yeah, it rings a bell. I got to go out. And I will say too that even though we've been remote at IVOXY for almost our entire existence, and by that we mean we don't go into an office, but we're often out with customers, meetings, engagements, etc. We have over the last 3 years now embraced Slack pretty heavily from a topical chat, but keep track of flowing conversation with projects, etc. But my favorite channel in our Slack is #watercooler. And while I like
Slack
it,
has been amazing for us as a remote company. It's wonderful.
Yes.
well, here's the thing. We started it 3 years ago, but it took a little while for everybody just to get on board and make it part of their day to day. So while I love the water cooler channel, it is not a one-for-one substitute for going in and talking at the water cooler or the lunchroom or whatever. And now we've never had that, but I still know what that's like. We all know what that's like because we've worked in offices, and the face-to-face is nice. And I will, I have been using my webcam more on WebEx calls. I don't love it, but I do feel like I owe it to everybody.
It adds something more to it, yeah.
It does. So it's been interesting. So yes, I do think we'll see more work from home. I don't think we'll see like, now everything is work from home. But I'm encouraged by the fact that I think companies are going to be forced to, like you said, David, that quality of life, to not have to calculate 3 hours of drive time in a day in a 5-day week. That's 15 hours of your life. That if you can even trim that back a percentage, that's a major improvement on everybody's life. And if you can still get your job done at least as efficient as you can do it in the office, I think that's a win for everybody.
I'm a huge fan of the idea of merit based, right? So you have to do a particular job in order to be functional at your company and be worth your weight, right? So that does not mean that I need to work a particular number of hours, or if I go upstairs and I throw the ball for my dog for 20 minutes, if I can still go back downstairs and get
so
everything.
You're in the basement.
Yeah, I am.
I've only
in the
got
basement.
one floor.
The blinds are all closed right now. I'm a gremlin. But if I can still do my job in a day that the employer decides is worth my salt, right? What's it matter if that takes me 5 hours or 8 hours? It does not matter. It should not matter, is my argument to the employer, as long
A lot
as
of it's that stigma.
Yeah, as long as
Get
I
your
am
stuff done, right?
executing. Exactly. Get your stuff done. Don't be an issue.
Hmm.
Well, and we've worked in that with IT a lot of different ways. I know myself, I am a fast worker. So, and fast does not mean sloppy, but I just am. I want to
Yeah.
get things done in the most efficient amount of time. So if David, you sit down, I'm going to pick on you and say, let's say it takes you 8 hours to do a task and it takes me 2 hours. Well, normally I would get the dirty eyeball there and say,
Yep.
What are you
what are you
doing
doing
for
yet?
those other
You're not
6?
working
Yeah.
hard enough here.
Yeah.
And we could have the same exact outcome. I mean, there's a vast difference in how long it takes people to do work at the same quality. And I think
You'll end up with a
work-
Homer Simpson thing and the little duck tapping on the yes key.
But yes, I mean I think it's a lot of a stigma, and hopefully this kind of, if nothing else, for good or worse, it washes it away a bit.
I would certainly hope so.
So I had a thought kind of question about that. Is like, what do you see people using for those remote works? I get the feeling that actual thin clients are what you'd see in the Cube farm. Is that the kind of stuff people are sending home? Is that the kind of stuff companies are sending home with remote workers? Or is it like whatever laptop you have or whatever thing you have, that's what you're using?
Yeah, there's a big push for bring your own device, right? The idea behind Horizon is definitely that you can use absolutely anything that's at your disposal. Um, if you're at grandma's house and you don't want to install a client, just open a web browser. If it's HTML5 capable, you're good to go. I do see some customers, um, really, especially now, but really in general as well, sending some of their call centers home. And so the most specialized piece of hardware that someone needs is a phone. If they're going to be kind of tied in uh, to their company's phone system rather than using a cell phone.
Does something like a soft phone on the web client work, or a soft phone on the desktop that you're then presenting? Does that work, or is that just like a bad idea all around?
It works, but I think it's kind of been discovered that most people don't enjoy it as much as having the piece of hardware. Like it's
The
not
thing to pick up. You can't slam it down on anyone.
you cannot hang up aggressively. Yeah, it's a problem.
On top of that, how many WebEx calls have we ever all gotten on where everybody jumps into the conference and it just works with everybody's mic working properly and everyone, can you hear me? Can you hear me? How many have been free of any of those issues? And I think the number is approaching 0. So the idea
as
that
we
a
get
soft phone
practice at it, right? Yeah.
right, for everybody just gonna boom work also is a whole nother thing, right?
Yeah, it's definitely its own skill to learn, and it's one that I think in this time all of us are trying to improve. As a necessity. But I think that I've seen customers run the gamut, right? From back in the day when I worked in construction, sending CAD machines all the way out to job sites to, we're going to send 0 clients out to job sites to, laptops and VPNs. Like there's a ton of different ways to do it. And like I said, like with this sort of topic, customer requirement, I mean, it should be true of everything, but there are some technologies that are a little more prescriptive, where you go like, oh, you need X amount of storage, buy this thing. Like you're never going to be sad that you bought this thing. But VDI, I feel like, is a little bit more particular in the sense where it really is down to the customer requirements. There's not often, there are some right or wrongs, but there's not often like a black and white, like if you do this, it's a terrible idea. Is one of the things that makes VDI health checks so interesting. Where you go,
depends, right?
Yeah, it does. It depends. It's a
Our
complicated
favorite.
answer for a lot of stuff.
Well, speaking of all this remote stuff and working from home and the water cooler, I've seen an awful lot of my friends posting on Facebook or whatever that whether it's a group FaceTime chat, or I know Zoom is getting a lot of cachet right now. Just and what's funny, I read a story that they halted trading on Zoom Technologies, I think, or Zoom Communications. There is a company that does media called Zoom, and their stock has gone up like 90%.
But it's the wrong
because
company.
people
the
thought
different
they
one?
were people thought they were Zoom, the WebEx competitor, and so they halted that. But No, I know Zoom's getting a lot, and Zoom's got the virtual background. I think WebEx for like iOS does as well. And people are doing the old green screen thing.
I was gonna ask. I
But
saw that pop up. Is there a plug-in? How is that green screen thing working? Because I elected to just like put art up and keep my room
on
clean.
Zoom,
I know on Zoom, on WebEx, on whatever.
yeah, I think they're just doing a fancier chroma key. They're
Okay.
seeing what's moving and they're seeing what's not moving. Is probably what
Right.
the deal is, and then giving it a little buffer. Yeah. So at IVOXY, we're going to try to get in on the fun, I think.
Mhm.
And it's very soon here. We're going to try to do a little. I'm loath to say virtual happy hour. I don't know why, but
Every
my
hour is
idea of
happy hour,
happy.
right?
Yeah, let's not kid ourselves. My idea of happy is not sitting in front of my desk, even with a beer or a cocktail in hand. But I could be happier. So, like maybe like mediocre hour or like mildly amused hour. I
Yeah.
think we can do something like that.
Happy's too
But
strong, huh?
right, and it's kind of just an engineering,
Mandatory
nerd
fun
out,
time.
commiserate. Yes, the beatings will continue
Yeah.
until morale improves. But we are. I mean, stay tuned. If you're listening to this and it hasn't happened yet, and the possibility that we would do, if it has happened yet, that we'll do more than one is probably likely. But the way I envisioned it was kind of just a Q&A. Let's just
Yeah.
talk. Kind of not a podcast. We're not going to record it. It's not going to be something that we're going to release. But let's just have an open forum where we can, like, you can bounce questions off us. We're going to have a few IVOXY engineers also, beer in tow. So or answer quality is not guaranteed. Also, by the way, no one's.
Fair
It's
enough. Yeah.
it's a sliding scale, right?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. But be on the lookout for that because I think it's fun and it kind of keeps things changing it up, and I get to dig out the old green screen and come up with what I'm going to try to have be the most elaborate background you've ever seen. I'm working on it.
You're working on
In-
it.
I'm working on it.
Interesting. I
It's
look
not
forward
as
to
easy
that.
with Mac, believe it or not, because a lot of when you think about video games and streaming and all of this, the technologies
Mhm.
where the effort's gone into, the answer is it's Windows typically, and I refuse to dual boot. No, I
No,
won't.
just
And
no.
virtualization's not a thing either for any kind of video and webcam. I mean, yikes. So
I always
I'm
thought
going at it alone on Mac.
you are. I always thought the Mac was the artistic laptop, right? It's the one that the coffee shop barista gets because she's working on her whatever thing, right? That's what I always thought the Mac was.
You're not wrong, but I would say this is more or less how am I going to get a virtual webcam to output and plug into this program so I can push it out this way. And those weirdo utilities to do that, and kludgy and hacky, are definitely something you're going to find in Windows more than Mac, I would say.
Okay.
Step in any time, David. I know you want to go to bat for your boy.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
I just publicly shamed you.
My laptop is Windows, and there's nothing wrong with that. It was also half the price of yours. It's fantastic. It does what it needs to do. And
Price. How's that trackpad feeling?
well,
Do you still have the pencil eraser?
No, I don't actually.
No.
And my
Kinda like that
keyboard is
knob.
my keyboard weathered the storm of the 2016 Mac perfectly fine.
Well,
What's that?
given that Windows laptops are 3 to 4 years behind, you're lucky because they are still copying the old design. So I think Apple tried to lure them into that tar pit. Go ahead and copy this crappy new keyboard, and I think they resisted up to this point.
Yeah, do you think that's what it was, or
Maybe
did Apple just make a huge mistake?
they made a huge mistake. That's Job level.
I made a huge mistake. Yeah.
Oh yes.
Uh-oh.
Kind of side note, but that MacBook Air looks really compelling now because they've finally updated that with the new keyboard, the new old.
So the
old
buttons move, is what you're saying.
they move.
Oh,
Yes.
very good.
It's not typing on concrete anymore. Yes.
It's
Yeah.
amazing to me that you could have gone out and spent $3,300 on a laptop and gotten a keyboard that didn't move.
I
And
know.
that is distressing.
Yep.
You know,
I'm
but
totally on board with you there.
I still have, true confessions. I still have my 2013 MacBook Pro sitting in a closet that I use for any time I have to take a laptop somewhere personally, right? Like I bought it back from the company. Like I adore the 2013 MacBook. So I'm certainly not a
I
Mac
still have
hater.
the 13 as well.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's the best piece of hardware that I have ever owned.
Yep. And when my wife and I started dating, she brought over one night, we were hanging out, and she brought over the Sony Vaio, and I recoiled like she brought the plague in, right? Oh! And she now uses that 2013, and it just, she opens it, it wakes up, it's there, it works. It's not,
Yep.
hey, can you come over and help me with it? There's none of that. It's just, it's a fantastic piece of hardware, and yeah.
I will say the biggest difference between Windows and Mac for me, just in my sort of working existence, is Mac does an amazing job of, if you close the lid, it stops consuming
Yes.
battery.
Oh God, yes.
Period. Where Windows
Oh.
is just I close the lid, I
Yeah.
come back 3 days later, my laptop will be dead.
Yes.
Hold that thought.
I
You're
don't know
talking
what
about
it was
a
doing.
2013 laptop. That's your 2013. That's gotten worse in Macworld, by the way.
Oh, has
Mac-
it?
Mac,
Has
would
it?
you agree?
Mine's been pretty good. I can count on one hand the number of times that's happened with my Mac in the last 3 years. Whereas like
Okay.
I pulled it out of
Yeah,
the
I
bag
don't
and
know.
it's hot because it's been running like once.
Well, not hot. They've got this thing called Power Nap, where it's like, I'm going to wake up and check email, even though you haven't opened your lid, which is the dumbest. I don't care. I just want it to wake up quickly. What I've found to be the major change in the last 10 years is sleeping or waking from sleep still takes longer on the whole, because instead of rehydrating 2 gigs of RAM, 4 gigs of
16
RAM,
or something.
it's rehydrating
Yeah.
32 gigs of RAM. Like, it has to read that
Ridiculous.
back in from the disk. Even though now we're not talking about spinning disk, it's still having to huck 32 gigs of data back into.
I think the one I
memory.
run into is a lot of times like my Mac sits here plugged in closed, and so I've got the screens up and everything laid out, and so it has to rehydrate everything and then redraw everything because now the
Yep.
desktop area is different.
And rearrange.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, Dave, we're glad to hear that you've got that 2013 working on that. It is a nice relic, yet still an ongoing beast.
It is still an important part of my life. Yeah.
It's that Honda Civic. It's that 90s Honda Civic, right?
Keeps going.
Yeah.
Just turned 300,000 miles and
Yep.
keeps going. David, thank you for joining us from under the Fremont Bridge. We do appreciate it.
Is
Yeah,
that what
well-
I see behind you? Ah.
Here there be trolls. Yes.
Mr. Kaz, do you have anything to add before we wrap?
No, I think that's it. Wash your hands, stay safe, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, stay tuned. And again, if we've already had 1 or 2 of these virtual mildly amused hours, by the time this releases, by the time you're listening, doesn't mean we won't have more. Reach out to us. You can hit us at podcast@ivoxy.com, or tweet at us, or LinkedIn us, or I don't know, Insta Snap us, whatever we've got going right now.
Social media.
We're also, I know I mentioned that we're on Google Play. Is that the name of the latest podcast store? Because I just saw that Google came out with a Google Podcast now. So, Matt, what is the latest beta version of Google we present podcasts?
I know you want to ask me that question because I'm the super Google fanboy guy, but
Google
I have no
punching
idea.
bag.
I have no idea.
Yeah. How could you? I mean, they just changed it for the 8th time this week.
Right.
But anyway, whatever Google's currently got testing in beta right now, I'm sure we're on there. It's also on Apple Podcasts, iTunes. It's on Stitcher, Overcast. That's my app of choice, actually, and Spotify. Also, we've got a lot of listeners on Spotify, so it's cool to see them kind
The
of
numbers,
moving into
right?
the podcast arena. Yeah. If you got questions, stuff you want us to talk about, either wait for the V beers or shoot us an email. Hit us up and we can get into it. And for Mr. Crow and for Mr. Cozzolino, I'm Matt Yeti. Thank you very much for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, wash your hands, stay home, and hopefully we'll all get back to it as soon as possible, everyone. Take care.